Ready for the weekend. Great. All right. Well, got a pretty exciting call topic today. It's one of my favorite topics because essentially being a successful athlete is all about how you respond to training topics. And that's why,
Setbacks.
oh, excuse me. Yes. I'm going to have to edit that. Being a successful athlete is all about how you respond to training setbacks. Yeah, I myself am involved in a pretty serious training setback at the moment. I'm not going to talk about that setback today, though, because I don't know how I'm getting out of it yet. So next year when we do this call, maybe I'll use that example.
I like that you're already like, well, I'm in the setback now, but I guarantee there'll be a good, because I think like so often when we have an athlete, and like I've felt this myself, like I'm not above this. I also am a human with a brain, but like people can really catastrophize. Like I remember like when I had my really bad tendonitis last year, I was like, this is it. My career is over. And my coach was like, you have zero data to support that. You need to go to PT, you need to take care of a couple things. You need to gather some more information, but catastrophizing is really, really counterproductive and actually can be a way for people might give themselves an out to avoid the vulnerable hard work that it takes to heal and recover from things.
I mean, I think it's really the job of an athlete to have that positive perspective and to, sit in the setback for as long as it takes to find your way back to performing at your best and competing at your best. I know that for me, like there's no question about it. There's not even a moment of hesitation. Like I'm just going through a big setback and I'm going out there, I'm doing what I can. And I think, that's really the key. And that's why, if you're willing to do that, you're going to see big gains on the other side of that setback. If your inclination is to give up in things, and unfortunately, as coaches, we all see that quite often. An athlete who has their first setback, they're struggling. Okay, I'm going to quit. And this call is all about working through the hard thing, leaning into those challenges and, really accepting that those challenges are inherent in this process. The process doesn't exist without them. If you think that it's just going to be a linear journey, unfortunately, you're going to be in for some rude awakenings. I know that, for some athletes, the setbacks are, they're fewer than with other athletes, or there's a lot more time in between them. And that's all fine. Everybody's journey is very individual and unique to them. But setbacks are always going to happen. And so we just want to start the call off by normalizing that and just saying like, this is a part of the process.
It's a bumpy road for everyone.
Yeah, it really is.
Absolutely everyone.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about numerous examples from my athletic career. I can talk about Zoe. She can talk about her own. Anyways, we want to give you guys some examples of some setbacks and some examples of how to work through them on this call. I suppose I'll start with one that I went through, and then we'll just kind of go down the line with the other coaches. If something comes to mind for you guys, feel free to use that chat box and just join in on the conversation. Anyways, I think my most significant training setback occurred over 2 years, from 2018 to 2020. And I was dealing with consistent side spurs, either during my workouts or during my races. And I could not really figure out at all what the pattern there to why those side spurs were occurring. But I would consider this for myself a setback because it really derailed a lot of my races. Unfortunately, I can remember some times where I was literally on the side of the trail, not able to breathe, cramping horribly, really just struggling. And in those events, like being in a great position, like podium contention, and just being totally the whole process being derailed and it really being almost getting to the point where there's like some anxiety around it. Like, I don't know, I'm going to go out there and try to race my best today, but at some point I'm going to have side spurs and I don't know if I'm going to work through it or if I'm going to have to walk for half an hour. And that's really tough. So, you know, my approach to dealing with that was, it was a multi-pronged approach because I had no idea what was causing it. I started out trying to do some like stretches for my abdominal area, and those really didn't do a whole lot. Then I did some breathing exercises that maybe kind of helped. But I think like the biggest thing that helped was like finally, maybe after about struggling with this for a year, finally going to see a really great PT in my area. And she really helped to address some issues that she felt were causing the side spurs. And, you know, what it came down to is some old scar tissue, maybe from a surgery that I'd had when I was younger. And, you know, really like had to put a lot of resources into that, like time and financial resources. She wasn't a very cheap PT to go to. But I made the investment in my health and in the future of my athletic career. And I did the work. You know, it wasn't just going in to get treatment and her kind of manipulating the fascia and going deep. It was, you know, really taking that work home with me and having to practice like and work on it on my own as well. The other piece to this that probably helped a lot was working on my nutrition too, because we felt like there was probably an electrolyte piece. You know, as electrolyte, magnesium is an important part of the electrolyte group. And if you're not getting enough electrolytes when you race, it can cause cramping. So that may have been taking an area in my body that was already predisposed to having an issue, and making it worse, exacerbating the issue. So I have like consistently worked on those things over several years and finally gotten to the point where I can basically race and do really hard workouts without having any issues at all. It took me a while to get there. Personally, I'm very happy and proud of myself for doing that work. I would still be where I was before if I hadn't just addressed these issues with the PT, if I hadn't talked about this stuff with Kylie, done a sweat test, like all of these things tend to be interconnected, right? And for me, there is also like a performance anxiety piece that was developing. So on the mental side of training, going into a race or a tough workout, not knowing if I was going to cramp and it was going to derail, like if I was almost like conditioned to like not do my best, not reach my potential because of this issue. And so I used a lot of visualization as a way to work through that performance anxiety. And I spent a lot of time in the week before my race, carving out 30 minutes or so a day to just close my eyes, lie down, and run through the race in my mind over and over again, and really see myself kind of like running well, breathing really well, staying relaxed, and just performing the way, you know, in the outcome that I wanted, which was to have a strong performance without the cramping. And I would also, on the other side of that, really visualize how I would respond if I was going to cramp out there and if I was going to have those side spurs, and just doing little things like taking in more sodium, doubling down on my electrolytes and things like that. And so I would be kind of pre-programmed before I'd even go into the race to do those things. And it has helped so much. I think 2021 was like my first season where I basically had zero cramping at all during my races. And I had a really excellent season. So it's all worked out. Even though when you're in the moment, you're not sure what's going to happen, you're not sure if it's going to work out, but you're just kind of doing your best to problem solve and bringing in as many experts into the equation as you can. I think that's super, super important. Cool. Well, I hope that little monologue or whatever was helpful, illustration was helpful for you guys. And just to, especially to normalize just some of the things that we go through. Like training setbacks don't have to be, you know, a stress fracture or some motivational thing. It can be like just dealing with like a persistent nagging side spur like I was dealing with. Yeah, let me move on. I want to bring Sarah on now because she's fresh off of crushing a 100-miler. This is her, I believe it's her second 100-miler. She has been working through the training process for over 1,000 days in her training log. And that,
happy 1,000.
Yeah, like that's huge. We always talk about like these benchmarks in training. They tend to happen like around that 500-day mark. And then again, like double down on that 1,000-day mark. Here we go, Sarah, with a really awesome accomplishment. And she definitely worked through a lot of challenges. And so she's got a great story for us.
Yeah. So the race did, I finished.
Maybe her mic's not on.
Oh, it says it's on. Can you not hear me? You can hear me?
Got you. Yeah, I was muted.
Okay. We're just talking on a silent computer.
So I'm really proud of this finish. So my other 100-mile finish, I did not have any setbacks on the day. I had like a really just great, easy day, and everything went really well. And I was proud of that because it was my first 100-miler and everything. But I'm like way more proud, I think, of this last week because it was so hard. I had so many setbacks from really early on. So the Pacific Northwest, I envisioned as chilly and kind of like fall weather. And I have a really dialed nutrition plan here in Colorado that has served me well for like really maybe like 15 months at this point. It's very dialed. I feel really confident with it. I was not taking into account the heat and humidity of the Pacific Northwest. And I was in a hole by 22 miles, sweating, and I don't sweat, and losing a lot of electrolytes. So I was dehydrated, struggling to eat early, starting to puke by mile 45. So my nutrition plan, which, keeps me moving, was totally thrown out. And I ended up having to spend a lot of time sitting in aid stations. And so I'm watching the clock tick by, I'm watching people pass me. And I know like, this is not the race that I thought I was going to be running that day. And it was hard to not feel some loss with that. But when I did, I was like struggling. I was like not in a good place. I was really struggling. And my crew was like, hey, like, okay, so you're not going to like have a top finish, but we're going to finish this race and like, we're going to make this work. And so we just problem solved. And every time I came to the aid station, I just got as many calories as I could, let myself digest, and then just hit until I could get to the next aid station, do the same thing. Like, can't eat while I'm moving. Fine. We can still eat. I'm still getting calories. And so it was reframing, not giving up because I wasn't, gonna have a strong day. I was feeling like when my ego was getting in the way, that's when I was having a low moment. And when I was like, this isn't what I want. This is hard. This is, all of that. And then when I was like, no, this is the race. Like when I was able to be present, I was really able to turn things around. And then I did get some tendonitis, which like really impacted the final 25 miles. And that sort of thing of like, is this like Zoe was saying, is my whole like, I'm ruining my foot and I'm going to finish this race and not be able to walk. And like, this is it, I was like really in the emotional brain, sort of telling myself a whole story about my foot. This is plantar fasciitis and, what am I doing? And my crew again was able to sort of be my thinking brain and just say, we're just taking an aid station at a time. This is one race, one day. This isn't a permanent injury and we'll figure it out when we get through. And so just by having somebody help keep me out of that emotional space and give me like a bigger picture, yes, this hurts right now. But like, let's pull back and look at the big picture. That was really helpful. So I ended up being able to finish. I was the last person to finish under cutoffs. They let a few people finish past cutoffs. So yeah, I feel really proud about like not letting those setbacks. I told myself a lot of silly stories out there, and I could have listened to those stories and given up like pretty easily. But by changing the story I was telling myself and changing my expectation and like being more flexible with the outcome and focusing on those process-oriented goals, I was able to get the finish.
Wow. Wow. What a story. I mean, that's just incredible. I can totally relate. That kind of feels like my CCC experience. I
thought of you many times out there, TJ. I really did. Like that helped. Like I was pulling from your strength. I was like, TJ was struggling from the beginning. Like I got 20 miles in, like I could do this if he could do this,
Good work. I mean, that's awesome. I'm curious if maybe some like of your past challenges and things that you've worked through, I don't know, kind of gave you some strength out there, or maybe even like subconsciously helped kind of pull you through. I mean, in our shared document here, you talked a lot about, coming back from pregnancy and motherhood as some of your, toughest, biggest setbacks and like moments of transition in your running career. I mean, just talk about that for a minute. Did any of that, I don't know, maybe give you some of the tools that helped you work through this?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, a lot of times we think about setbacks with training as like surprise injuries, or like a body thing. Like, I hurt something, I figured out how to heal it, and then I move forward, or I figured out the combination of things to make me feel better, and then I move forward. And with becoming a parent, yes, there are definitely physical things if, you birth a baby, carry a baby, but like just becoming a parent, your whole schedule shifts, your identity shifts. You have very little control of your life. And you do have to do a lot of that problem solving and what can I get in where, and you have to be flexible with outcomes, and you have to like, okay, sort of how I was the same way that was like aid station to aid station last weekend, just get to this next part. I mean, really, when you have new kids, it's like you run on the days you can run, you accept the week in front of you, the training as it unfolds. You don't have expectations about what it is. And if you have those expectations, you're going to be disappointed. And those sorts of lessons, like when I was out there, like with these expectations about how my race was going, then I was disappointed. And when I was able to say, no, I'm just going to let things unfold. So I really do think that piece, like that flexibility, and that process oriented and like present moment focus, were things that I really drew from that transition to parenthood.
And I definitely think that those are tools that athletes need to constantly be trying to develop, because without that flexibility and without the ability to be flexible with expectations specifically, it can be very easy to become disenfranchised, to feel very disappointed. I mean, we see this all the freaking time as coaches. Sometimes I just get blue in the face because I'm like, all right, here we are as coaches. We're trying to like normalize these things and help athletes, become successful. And like part of that is like understanding that like we need to control our expectations. Like if my expectation is like, I'm going to boot and rally and then all of a sudden be crushing my miles, like, is that a good expectation to have? Because like, if you don't meet that after like you're able to get some food in aid station, you're just going to feel awful mentally on that next segment of trail. And so something that I've always at least tried for myself is to really come into a race with, or into a setback with an infinite mindset, and just to try to embrace how everything's going to unfold naturally. And I wish I had more words for that, because I feel like it sounds hippy dippy to just be like, just embrace how this unfolds and try to be in the present moment and respond and use your process oriented goals. Because like when we have an expectation for how this is going to feel or how the setback is going to go, it becomes difficult to deal with the inevitability of that, like not going as planned. And so as coaches, we're always like, try not to be so rigid, try to be more flexible, try to lower your expectations, not because like, I don't think you're capable of getting through the setback, but because in case the setback doesn't, you don't work through it in a linear way, you're going to be more equipped, because disappointment is really hard to deal with in the moment because of the things that you mentioned, the ego and all those things that you mentioned earlier and what you were saying, Sarah. So, like you almost have to live these experiences many, many times yourself. And it's like almost no coaching can really like help an athlete. Like you just have to go through it and go through it again and like be willing to go through it. And then you develop like, almost, it's not like a thick skin to it, but you just develop like an understanding that like, yes, I can find light at the end of that tunnel.
I got advice from Courtney DeWalter about running hundreds, but I think it's also just good life advice. And she said, the key is to just be curious about what's on the other side of the discomfort. And I think that just like having an open, like maybe you will boot and rally, maybe you'll just keep booting and the rally doesn't come, but like you owe it to yourself to find out what that is, right? And I think that's, the same thing with like life setbacks is like, you owe it to yourself to be curious and find out like what's on the other side of like a professional setback, of a personal setback, a relationship setback, whatever it is, just stay curious with it and don't stop looking for that other side.
Totally. Yeah. I love that kind of like the forward moving mentality that almost exists there for people who have recognized that life is full of trials and ebb and flow. And, it's just like, yeah, I'm going through it. It really freaking sucks, but like it's not going to last forever. I'm acknowledging that I'm going through it, and I'm going to continue to try to, do everything I can each day to be in a better place tomorrow. And whether I am or not, I accept that. And like, eventually, I think especially in ultras, like if you run enough ultras, like you can feel profoundly awful for a large period of time and then all of a sudden be feeling great. And it's like so crazy and weird about this sport. But that's just kind of what happens. And like the athletes who are able to kind of just sit in it, like you did, Sarah, are the ones who are able to like find the light at the end of the tunnel. It's like almost using the setback as kind of a motivation, rather than a referendum on like, I'm not good enough. And like all of these things that can sometimes get into our heads.
I'm curious, can I get a show of hands from the coaches who has ever felt like I'll never be the same runner again? Like who's ever had a setback where they're like, I'll never be the same?
Unanimous.
Just, yeah. For the Many listeners times at home, that's a 100% hand raise from all the coaches.
Yeah.
So just, you're not alone.
Yeah. Let's hear from another coach. Kristen, I feel like your story here is pretty intense. And I think it can really help athletes who are kind of dealing with, some of the more mental and life stuff and how that can affect the training. Would you like to dive into your example?
Yeah. So for me, a lot of my setbacks are up until recently with my back injury, my setbacks had been mental and emotional. So if anything stressful happened, anything that would like trigger my anxiety, running was always the first thing to go out the window. And so before COVID happened, sorry, Avalanche wants to be involved. Before COVID happened, everything was great, was, on a really fun path with training. And it was right when I got back from New Zealand after Tarawara, my dad had his second heart attack within, a few month period, which was really scary. My dad and I are really close. And I was living in Boulder at the time, so I couldn't be there physically to help. I felt, super helpless, didn't know what to do. Driving back and forth wasn't really an option. And the world was also shutting down. So I wanted to be as close to my family as possible. And honestly, within a week, I packed up everything, my entire life in Boulder. I didn't even get to say goodbye to a lot of people that I wanted to say goodbye to. And I moved back to South Dakota to be close to my parents and my dad as this was happening. And what I didn't realize was the amount of stress and anxiety from being in Boulder was like quadrupled now that I was like with my parents every day. And I love my parents, I love my family, but there's just a lot that goes into that, and like working through some of the medical stuff with my dad and watching him have to take, 40 different pills a day just to stay alive was like the emotional impact like that it had on me, and watching this and like, understanding like the futility of life and what's really important. And in a lot of scenarios, I think normally I would have used running as an outlet to decompress or to sort of sort through things. But I started using running as an outlet that became like almost harmful, where I was crying through my runs. I felt selfish. I felt like it was like mentally, it was the lowest point I've ever been in. And so for me, I had to take a step back from running. Like I had to dial it in. I had to like reprioritize and just be present with my family, in and out of hospital, like in and out of surgery. Like then my dad got COVID. So it was like all of this stuff was happening and I had no idea how to address it. So yeah, running setback, like probably the biggest running setback of my life. And what I learned from that was like, step one, get a therapist. That was super duper helpful. Just being able to talk about these fears, anxieties, worries, the unknowns, was really important to have, like an objective outside perspective. The other thing too was that like, even though I wasn't running, I was still so psyched for all of my friends and co-coaches and training partners who were running and doing these really amazing things and having these breakthroughs. And I felt like I was missing out. So I had a lot of FOMO happening because I wasn't in Colorado anymore. And I wasn't running for the time being. And so for me, the social media aspect was really hard as well. So I came to a point where I needed to shut it down or just be okay with everything that was happening. And at the time I wasn't ready to do that. So I don't know if any of you guys followed me, probably not, but like I shut my entire account down. I deleted Strava. I deleted Instagram. I got off. The only reason I didn't get off Facebook was because of the Microcosm community, because I like needed it. So there were different things that I did, to help in that situation, but, then the more help that I got, the more I talked to like my friends and my therapist, the better I felt. And I was able to like go for a run and not feel selfish for not being right next to my dad the whole time. I was able to like get back into a consistent training routine where 5 miles didn't feel like 15. And so I was really patient with myself. I journaled a lot. I did a self-compassion workbook in like that 6-month span. I've probably done that workbook twice now, like since COVID started. So I think just like learning how to be patient and understanding that like running is something we get to do. It's not something that we have to do. And we are actively choosing to do this because we enjoy it. Like we're not curing cancer, we're doing a lot of really amazing things. I think just like I was kind of forced to take myself a lot less seriously as an athlete, as a runner, within that setback, but it also made me appreciate the process and the people and the actual act of running so much more than I had before. Because I think you get into a mindset where you're like, none of this matters, but like it really does. And it is really important to feel a sense of connection and belonging. And yeah, I'm I feel great now. It's been a process. And sometimes there are triggers and phone calls that I have with my parents now. We don't live in South Dakota anymore, but yeah. So, celebrating the small things, being present when you can, like TJ said, like, be here now. I remind myself of that like all the time. So I think this all does tie back to the process of running, because running is a microcosm for life. And the way I was able to sort of transition out of that like very stressful time and then kind of just like push forward and like be able to train for OCC and like make it to the start line, make it to the finish line. Those were huge moments for me because of everything that's happened in the last 2 years. And like, I think during the really hard parts of this process for me, I had to keep reminding myself that like, you matter, your priority, like your goals matter. And the most important promises we make are the ones that we make to ourselves. And so like, I was really emotional at UTMB because I had just like fulfilled this promise that I had worked so hard to fight, despite setback after setback after setback. And I was just like super grateful for like sticking with the process because it matters.
Wow, Kristen, thank you for sharing all of that. I think
like weepy.
Yeah, I know that it's hard for you to talk about, but I think it is really important for just our community, our athletes, other listeners out there to kind of hear about this stuff, because when things happen in life, they really do affect our training and how we perceive our place in the sport, especially for, lifelong athlete like yourself. It can be very difficult when, you have a moment where life stuff is really taking the priority and like you're not able to access your your outlets in the same way, or they're not giving you the same thing. And something that really resonated with me was like when you mentioned a 5 mile run feeling like 15. And I think a lot of athletes can really relate to having that as part of their story at one time or another. I mean, I certainly have gone through that many, many times. And I just think that your approach and the tips that you offered, are just really excellent. I think that they, universally can be applied in so many different areas. You should be so proud of yourself for, working through that. And, we're really grateful to have you with us to be able to share something like that. There was a follow-up question in the chat box about whether or not you mentioned what you're going through to your coach and if they helped you adapt the training plan during that time.
That was a little tricky because sometimes I would ebb and flow where I would tell my coach, I'm fine, everything's great, because I thought I was. And I would go out for a run. I'd go out for my third run of the week. And I'd realize like, I'd start having a panic attack or an anxiety attack. And I'd be like, I can't do this. I'm never going to be the runner I was. And the whole thing fell apart. Like it'd start to spiral. So I was very communicative with my coach about those thoughts. And it kind of got to the point where it was like, hey, we either need to take a step away or you need to focus on consistency. And that was a little harsh at the time for me. And I ended up taking a step back and just saying, I need to focus on this right now. And, he was amazing. He was so helpful with everything, helped me find a therapist, made sure it was the right therapist for me. And then checked in of like 2 or 3 times a week, which was awesome. Like I felt genuinely cared for. I felt supported. And I think that was, as a friend, as a coach, like everything David did for me was just like unexpected, but not at the same time. Like he coached me through running and through life. And like, what more can you ask for? He was amazing.
Yeah, awesome. Coaches aren't therapists, but we're great supporters.
I've definitely helped a couple athletes find a therapist, like,
Yeah.
and that's a boundary that I'm always really clear with. As soon as someone's asking me for more emotional resources that I can ethically give, like, that's when I'm like, you know what, I don't have the answer for this, but I do have, I can work with, like, I've even tapped into Sarah to help people find therapists that were in their network and that were trained in their, like, what specific area they needed. And that's something that, I've done before, and I will do it again, because I really believe in people building out their team.
Totally. And I think back to that flexibility thing, Kristen, where you mentioned, like, okay, we came to the decision that, like, it was best for me to, like, step back from training for a little while, maybe to give yourself some emotional space, maybe to stop making running a referendum on who you are. Just a few things that maybe I've gathered from listening to you, but I think that that's really important. And, like, stepping back can be like going for as long as it feels good. Like, if it's a 30-minute run and that's all that feels good, we can build on that. And so your training only looks like good training within the context of what's going on in your life. If you continue to try to run 15 miles when, 5 miles already feels like enough, that can really create a discontentment with the process. And, like what you mentioned, right, Kristen, like, this is all about just having fun. Like, if you're not enjoying the training, you're not going to reach your goals, or you won't reach them consistently. You're going to get burned out. I mean, this is just the facts. This is what the research suggests. This is, like, how do we become resilient and work through these challenges? Like, we need to prioritize what feels fun. We need to align our training lives with the goals that we have. Like, we need to make sure that things are in balance. And, like, although I don't believe it's possible to have perfect balance, it is worthwhile to try to pursue balance in the way that it works for you in your life. And that sounds like to me, Kristen, that, like, you found your way to that point, and that's so important. That's why you're still, here. That's how you got to OCC and were able to run that and everything. Sometimes when we take a small step back, and it could be like a shift in volume, or, maybe like taking a week to just run off the clock. Like, that's something I like to do with my athletes. It's just like, all right, do what feels good for a week. See how you feel after that. Or, like, run without your watch for a week. See how you feel after that. Or take 3 days off. See how you feel after that. And it's so important, like, to communicate that with your coach. I really like that you didn't, necessarily, like, you had some serious external things going on. You recognized how they were affecting your training, and then you kind of, like, problem solved and figured out a way to work with those challenges. And you mentioned specifically in your notes, like, leaning into what you were feeling rather than ignoring it. Awesome.
Yeah, that was huge. That was, just being like, this is how I feel. This is how my body feels in response to this emotion. And just, like, being curious about it and seeing, like, what else came up. So I feel like the last 2-3 years have been, like, my first 100-miler.
Yeah.
Just problem solving. So yeah, it's worth it. Definitely. Therapy is amazing. Lean into what you're feeling, and also just, like, trust the process.
Absolutely. I mean, trusting the process is fundamental. Don't turn away from the people that have been there supporting you all along. Bring them into the conversation. They know you best. That training history, that cumulative mutual time that you spent together is really powerful in tough moments. That's the time to check in more.
Yeah. The other thing I would say too, that I forgot I wrote in the notes, is get involved with your community, volunteer, help out, go crew, go pay, like, if you can't pace, but, like, go do something with your friends who are doing these epic things. Like, if you have a friend doing an FKT and you want to, like, even just go spectate, just be there, just be at an aid station, mark a course, sweep a course, I think just getting yourself reestablished in the community is really important. And I think volunteering, by doing that, is a really good way to give back and to also be involved at the same time.
Awesome. Absolutely. All right, let's hear from Coach Drew. He wants to talk about posterior tendonitis, a really common running injury. Drew, take it away.
So I like this one because I've had more frequent, I guess, interactions with athletes having issues with post-tib issues, but really you can insert any type of injury that I know we all have, issues with. Not all of us have had to deal with like pregnancy or parenthood, right? I know that I do. I really, what Sarah said earlier really resonated with me, and I'm actually going to text her after this is over so I could talk to her more about it. But I guess injuries per se, something that all of us are going to have issues with at one time or another. Just wanted to kind of, I guess, talk a little bit about when it happens, right? So whether it's a post-tib thing or IT band syndrome or a stress fracture or whatever, it's really, I guess, easy for athletes to overreact, right? You panic, you're like, I can't run right now. And so all this work I've been doing for what could be weeks or months or years, right? Is just all down the drain. And so you get this like negative downward spiral of emotions and thoughts that are really not conducive to, I guess, helping you get better. So, that negative energy just really brings you down, not just like from a physical standpoint, but just that mental standpoint as well. And then it just all, goes to shit from there. So some things that when you get hurt, even if you're not hurt right now, when you get hurt, because it will happen, unfortunately, it's baby steps, right? The first thing is we need to diagnose what's wrong with you. So going to see, I'm a big fan of my local physical therapist here in Northwest Arkansas. They're awesome. If you haven't established a relationship with a really good sports specific healthcare professional, for me, it's the physical therapist. For you, it might be something different. But establishing a relationship with someone that can know you, right? It's not like you're going to go see your physical therapist one time and then never go see him again, right? Establishing a really good relationship where you guys can communicate effective and efficiently, someone that you trust that's able to diagnose what's going on, so you kind of know how to proceed moving forward. There are several times where someone will say like, man, my ankle really hurts. I'm kind of limping and I need you as a coach to tell me what I'm supposed to do. It's like, we don't know what's wrong with your ankle. Like I can't diagnose it virtually, right? So going to see someone, find out what's wrong so you know how to proceed. Any exercises that you end up doing at a physical therapist, I know this is probably super cliche at this point to say, but all of the exercises and work that you get at a pro, like the physical therapist, are things that you should be doing at home as well. I don't know a single physical therapist that just treats you there and say, well, don't do anything, but come back to me in a few days and we'll do the same stuff. It's like they give you homework. They should give you papers and documents or links to videos that show you exactly what you should be doing, how often, and really being dedicated to that. And so really, once you get all that stuff, trying to communicate that with your coach. And oftentimes I know that I've seen TJ do this before, which is really awesome. I'm sure the other coaches as well, but asking athlete, is it okay if I communicate with your physical therapist? I know that I do that with my athletes. Sometimes it's just easier if we can bring someone into like your training to kind of get a better idea of the progress to continue. And even when you're not running, say you end up taking like a week off or 2 weeks off or whatever the thing is, say you break your foot and you're 6 to 8 weeks off. During that time, it's not like, well, we're going to pause your log and then we're not going to communicate for 8 weeks. No, like aside from rest days, really any day that say you're not running, but you're cross training or you're having to do your stretches or your physical therapy routine, like I want to hear about it. I want to know what you're doing to at least, if anything, hold you accountable, right? To make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, because I want you healthy, because that's kind of our job too, right? Keep you healthy, get you healthy, and then accomplish big goals. And so really communication, still a big part of it. What I like to tell people too is really when you're in the midst of an injury too, really trying not to think so far forward. Had so many athletes that might have say it's a marathon on their training program that's like maybe 3 months away or 4 months away. They end up having an intense pain that needs to be diagnosed and handled, but they're unable to run for a few weeks. They're like, well, crossing that marathon off my calendar. It's like, no. What we're doing here, we're ignoring everything past this 1 week. This 1 week, let's create a plan, let's stick to it and really get nitty gritty for this 1 7-day period. And then every week we just look at, the next week, and then we get that done. And the next week we really break it up, right? Looking so far forward, months ahead of time, is a complete waste of time. And it's a really easy way to kind of get down about the process. I aside from a broken bone, really, there's not a ton of injuries that would have you off for so long where you couldn't, still toe the line at the race that you've been training for. And hell, even if you broke something, that's still like, sure, you might not podium, but still getting there healthy and feeling good and motivated and confident are still things that you can do after taking a little bit of time off. And so I don't know, that's kind of what I was thinking with like injury stuff. I know that other coaches, I'm missing things. Other coaches can kind of help me along, but
no, I think you really, are we muted? No, we're not. I'm talking. Great. Drew, I think that was such good. And the thing that I wanted to emphasize that Drew was talking about was have a relationship with a PT. As a coach, it's always really challenging when I have an athlete that an injury pops up and then they drag their feet reaching out to the PT. And then they're like, well, I can't get an appointment for 2 weeks. A lot of times I'm not going to feel comfortable assigning you anything other than rest or maybe easy X training without an expert looking at you, working with you, getting their hands on you and prescribing what level of activity is appropriate for your injury. So, I know that like everyone's circumstances and connection to healthcare is going to be different, but if you can do anything for your running, it's establish a relationship with a PT so that you can you don't have to find a new healthcare practitioner and you don't have to explain things. And you don't have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks to get in. Like TJ and I both have a PT. We share a PT. It's very romantic. He's always asking me how TJ is doing. And like, we can text this guy, we can get in that week. Like having someone, and like, I know that like not but find a place in your area that will provide you that level of service. Because if it takes you weeks and weeks to get in every time something comes up, that's not an appropriate level of care for athletes at the level that are training with Microcosm. I just can't emphasize that enough, that having a relationship with a PT is just totally critical for an athletic life.
Yeah. And just to expand a little bit more on some of the great tips that Drew had, the communication piece, even if you're going to be taking some days off, resting, working through a stress fracture, whatever it is, if you reach out to me about that, I'm going to say, hey, we're not pausing coaching. Like, we're checking in 5 days a week.
Yeah. An injury is not a get out of coaching free card, by the way.
Stick with it. It's so important to have that support and accountability, to be able to have someone who can mirror back to you what you're feeling, to be able to just, you can externalize some of the frustration and the doubt that goes into dealing with an injury. I think that, if you take the communication piece out of it and you want to go, it's a huge mistake. Just straight up, it's one of the biggest mistakes you can make at that time. You want to bring your supporters in. You want to keep them close when you're going through a challenging moment. You don't want to push them away. That's why we have to follow up with the PT. Something that always gets me is athletes who get diagnosed with an injury, but then never follow up to get cleared after that injury. Bring the process full circle. Very important. Your coach can only coach you and give you a plan based on the information that you provide. So if you don't bring it full circle, yes, I've been cleared to run. I saw my PT. I went to my sports doc. He gave me an MRI and my ankle is healed. Whatever it is, bring it full circle, because without that, we are just guessing. And we don't want to guess. We want to use science. We want actionable information to give you the best possible plan forward. Another thing that I really like what Drew said is like, don't freak out about your upcoming race. Like a lot of like those outcomes are determined in how you actually like perceive that injury setback. If your perception is like, this is going to take me out for 6 months, you're probably going to be out for longer than you think. But if you really dedicate yourself to that rest, do it right, and say like, I can get through this, and you have that positive mindset, it will help you deal with the stress of the situation better. So Drew, awesome tips. Kylie, I really want, like in our last 10 minutes or so here, to hear from you, because you've dealt with some pretty serious setbacks in the past, one, requiring like a pretty serious surgery. And I thought maybe your perspective, just piggybacking on what Drew was mentioning, could be really helpful for athletes.
Yeah, and I think, so context, I had foot surgery back in 2017, and it was kind of a freak like trail injury where I tore the tendon under my big toe. And I really tried to do conservative treatment because I wanted to try and avoid surgery, which ended up, that was 3 months, and then it didn't heal. And then I still had to get surgery. So the entire process ended up being like a year plus. So I think it was really important what you guys were saying with, I stuck with David as my coach the entire time. And for me, that was actually like really motivating to kind of like have that person just to kind of vent to, or like, what do you think I should do for cross training, et cetera. And I actually have 2 athletes right now. I only coach 10 athletes, but 2 of them are going through, like, I have a hip surgery and another, I forget, foot surgery, I believe, or something. And those are pretty serious things, and it's not maybe just a like 3-month recovery process. And so you might have to shift your perspective a little bit. And I'm trying to be really supportive of those people. And because of my own experience that I went through, and I know that it can be really hard, but I kind of like what Drew was saying too, about just, focusing on what you can do, communicating with your coach, looking forward to like brighter days, and like working through that injury, and then kind of like, wanting to continue to get out there. And for me, I had some setbacks too with some imbalances due to that surgery. And so it's taken me a couple years, and I'm still like working through some of that stuff. And for me, I had to go through like multiple PTs trying to find like a good strength coach. And so, just trying to be patient with some of those things. And then the other thing for me was like running has always been a huge, huge part of my life. And to the point where it was like my entire identity. And so like trying to figure out like, what can I also do outside of running to like, I like Kristen's recommendation of like volunteering or staying connected, but at the same time, like, doing agility with my dog, or like doing some other things too that make me happy, and trying to kind of balance that with the run training and stuff, and then that recovery process, et cetera. So I feel like I don't necessarily have new ideas that weren't mentioned, but just wanting to maybe reiterate some of the things that other coaches said, and also that little piece about maybe just like having some other hobbies and things that you can do at the same time while you're going through that recovery process, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of everybody having other activities and creative pursuits that they get to enjoy alongside of running and work and being parents. And like, yeah, life needs to be full of all of that stuff. And it's especially important when you're going through an injury. So, thank you for, just kind of mentioning that again. I actually don't think we talked about hobbies on the call yet. And so that's really just such an important thing. I can't, whether I work with like an opera singer and another vocalist and another lady, she's in the choir, and like all of these cool things. And like
singers make banger endurance athletes
people
too.
who paint and like enjoy arts and creative pursuits, they have things to do when running. And I think that right now, let me just say, like, if you're running and training, you're going to eventually get injured. Like, you're eventually going to have a motivational setback. Something is going to happen. If it doesn't, like, I'm thinking maybe we could up the level of training a little bit. Like, this stuff is really inevitable. And so having a tool set prepared and ready for when this stuff does happen really helps. I'm wondering, Kylie, like you mentioned in here that it helped you to change your perspective on running in competition. And if you could give like an example of that, or how you did that, or what that encompassed, I think that'd be really great for the athletes.
I think the main thing I meant there is that maybe similar to Kristen too, I've always been like so focused on like performance and maybe not appreciative of, the experience and kind of getting to that finish line and like being part of this community and like appreciating like actually being able to be out there and push myself. And so, going through that injury process, recovery process, and then now like I just have a different perspective on any time that I get to race. Like, I'm lucky to be racing, so like my perspective is shifted a little bit in that sense.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's just having like that gratitude and appreciation for what we're doing, that it's not a given, is really valuable. I mean, that was something that also, you have in common with what Kristen mentioned, just like, oh, my OCC finish wasn't just about like finishing OCC. It was about like all of these other things that I've had to overcome to get here. And that's, we mentioned that week in and week out in the Rad Weekend updates. It's like we could write stories about everything our athletes have gone through to get to that finish line. And that finish line doesn't just represent like the fact that they, started at this one place and then finished like a pre-designed course and a race and an organized event. It really represents like all of these other experiences, trials, the highs, the lows, like the times in the middle that kind of like really gives that whole thing meaning. And like as runners, we get the opportunity to assign whatever meaning to what we're doing that we want. Like, meaning isn't like, the trail has no meaning. It's only a trail. Like, we decide like what that feels like for us. We decide like that we like that. We decide that like this means something and what that thing means. And so we have like, I think there's so much power in that. And like, you get to be flexible and change. And like, this is why I'm always like, okay, well, when we're going through a hard time, like, what's our why? Like, what do we value? And like having purpose and meaning, those are things that we get to manufacture, and they can change based on what our present experience is, whether or not we're going through an injury or we're having trouble with motivation, or, like all of those things are within your control. And that is really, really powerful. And that's something that I've seen universally be discussed in a roundabout way throughout the entire conversation. I changed my perspective on what running meant and what competition meant for me. I changed my perspective around what I could do with running at the time based on my other life circumstance. Like all of that stuff is super powerful. It gives you an advantage over your situation that you might not otherwise have if you're not aware of that. Like, I love, Zoe and I talked about this a lot on our run yesterday. Like, the trail is just the trail. The trail has no inherent meaning other than it's a trail. Somebody built it, and they built it for you to go out there and enjoy in your own way. And like that is the coolest thing about the sport. It's the same with, you know, if you're running on the roads, we get that opportunity. So thank you. Thanks for sharing, Kylie. I'm not sure if that brought anything to mind for you.
No, that was great. You're just summarized a good ending note, I feel like.
All right. Well, maybe we'll edit this.
In conclusion, nothing matters and the only meaning exists in what you create. Have a great Friday.
I'm going to create some of my own meaning out there on the trails this weekend for however long I can run for. Thanks, everybody. I know this is can be a challenging topic. I hope that just in hearing some of the stories from the other coaches who, you know, I don't want to put coaches on pedestals. We're humans. We go through
but that's why we're good
things.
Coaches.
Well,
is that like you can't bring anything to the table that we're going to be like, uh-oh. And as a perfect, unflawed being, this is too much for me. We're like, yeah, been there, done that, seen it a million times. We got this.
I think it's just important to recognize that, you know, we're coaches because we're a little bit further along in our journey than most of the athletes that we coach. And so having that perspective is really helpful for our athletes. That's why we can have calls like this and provide, you know, actionable feedback so that people can react to these situations. Or actually, we don't want to react. Kristen, thanks for putting that in the chat. We don't want to react to this. Like, we want to respond. And that, you know, gives us a lot of power in how we deal with the setbacks. Well, thank you guys. Next week, we're going to touch a little bit on the motivation side of setbacks, as well as kind of go through our classic rapid fire Friday. So hope to see you guys there. If not, you can listen on the pod or check us out on YouTube. Have an awesome weekend. Thanks, coaches. You guys did a great job. Bye.